Caleb Mercer had exactly $318 in his checking account when he heard the richest woman in Seattle say she needed a husband before breakfast, and the sensible thing would have been to keep tightening the valve behind the conference room wall and pretend he had heard nothing. Sensible decisions kept his 9-year-old son fed. Sensible decisions kept the rent paid on their 2-bedroom apartment in Shoreline and kept the aging Honda running long enough to reach school, work, and the grocery store. Sensible decisions did not involve billionaire CEOs, hostel boards, or marriage proposals overheard at 10:47 p.m. from inside a mechanical closet. But Caleb had spent most of his adult life discovering that sensible and survivable were not always the same thing. He was 37, the senior building systems technician at Vail Dynamics, a Seattle medical device company headquartered in a 42-story tower overlooking Elliott Bay. His navy work shirt had a burn mark near the cuff. His hands smelled faintly of pipe sealant. His knees hurt from crouching beside a malfunctioning pressure regulator for nearly an hour. On the other side of the slatted service panel, Celeste Vail stood at the head of a walnut conference table, while 4 attorneys explained how she might lose control of the company she had spent 12 years transforming from a regional laboratory supplier into one of the country's fastest-growing surgical robotics firms. "The trust language is explicit," said her general counsel. "You receive your father's remaining voting shares only if you are legally married before your 36th birthday. That is Thursday. At 8:00 a.m. Friday, the shares revert to the family holding company." Celeste did not raise her voice. She almost never did. "And the holding company votes with Everett Sloan." The attorney hesitated. "Almost certainly." Celeste stared through the glass wall at the rain sliding over downtown Seattle. "Then find me someone. I don't care who. I need a husband by tomorrow morning." Behind the wall, Caleb stopped turning his wrench. Celeste Vail had never looked like a woman who could be cornered. She was 35, controlled to the point of intimidation, and carried herself as though every room had been built according to dimensions she had personally approved. Business magazines loved photographing her in dark suits beside surgical robots and calling her the engineer who made medicine move. Employees used less flattering language when she was out of earshot. Ice machine. Calculator in heels. The woman who once rejected a $50 million acquisition because a vice president had rounded a mortality statistic to make the presentation cleaner. What almost nobody understood was that Vail Dynamics had not really been handed to her. Her father, Richard Vail, had founded the company, but died when Celeste was 23, leaving behind outdated patents, crushing debt, a board dominated by his longtime friends, and a trust written around his private conviction that his daughter would become more stable once she married. Celeste had spent a decade proving every assumption wrong. She sold 2 divisions, reinvested in robotics, mortgaged nearly everything she inherited, and survived 3 failed takeover attempts. She had also made the mistake of becoming engaged to a venture capitalist named Adrian Pike, a mistake that ended 6 months earlier when private messages revealed he had been feeding Celeste's expansion plans to a competitor. The breakup became tabloid entertainment. Everett Sloan, 71 and chairman of the family holding company, used it as proof that Celeste's judgment was increasingly erratic. Now he intended to obtain the final block of voting shares and replace her as CEO. "We cannot hire a stranger and fake a marriage," said Marisol Chen, Celeste's personal attorney. "The trustees can challenge intent." "Then we don't fake it," Celeste replied. "We create a lawful contract between consenting adults. Prenup, separate assets, confidential terms, 2 years. And where exactly do you find a trustworthy husband in 11 hours? A metallic clank came from the service alcove. Everyone turned. Caleb stepped out carrying a wrench. His face was tired, his expression calm. "Depends," he said. "What does Trustworthy pay?" The room went still enough for Caleb to hear rain ticking against the windows. Everett's lawyers would have described what happened next as impossible. Celeste's legal team considered it worse. "Who are you?" Marisol demanded. Caleb nodded toward the open mechanical panel. "The person preventing the executive floor heating loop from flooding your server closet. You heard that conversation? More than I wanted to." A younger attorney reached for his phone. "Security can escort him downstairs." "They can," Caleb said, "but the pressure regulator still needs 15 minutes, and the replacement part is sitting in my bag." Celeste studied him. Caleb knew who she was, obviously. Everyone at Vale Dynamics knew Celeste Vale, but being examined by her from 6 feet away felt different from passing her in an elevator. Her gaze moved from his stained sleeve to the company badge clipped at his belt. "Caleb Mercer," she read. "Senior Facilities Systems. Building Systems," he corrected before he could stop himself. Marisol made an offended sound. Celeste did not. You asked about compensation." Caleb set his wrench on the table. "I have a son, Ethan. He's 9. His mother moved to Arizona 3 years ago and has seen him twice since. I cover everything: rent, after-school care, soccer, dental work, the whole glamorous package." His voice stayed level because desperation became dangerous when people could smell it. "The owner of our apartment complex is converting the building. We have 60 days to leave. Seattle rent being what it is, I need first month, last month, deposit, moving costs, and preferably enough money that one busted transmission doesn't turn us homeless." One attorney stared at him. "So you're proposing marriage because your lease is ending?" Caleb looked at Celeste. "She has a problem money can solve. I have problems money can solve. I'm not pretending it's romantic." Celeste's eyes narrowed. "And your price?" Caleb thought about Ethan asleep in the employee family room downstairs because the sitter had canceled and emergency overnight care cost more than Caleb made in a shift. "Enough to buy stability," he said. "Not a yacht. By 1:20 a.m. Caleb had been background checked, credit checked, criminal record checked, employment checked, and asked more personal questions than during his entire divorce. He sat across from Celeste in a smaller conference room while Marisol assembled the legal skeleton of an arrangement. Neither of them could quite believe they were considering. Caleb's history turned out to be offensively boring. 7 years at Vale Dynamics. Before that, Navy Construction Battalion service, followed by an apprenticeship in commercial mechanical systems. 1 speeding ticket, no arrests, no lawsuits, no gambling, no mysterious offshore accounts. Shared custody had existed on paper until Ethan's mother stopped using her visitation. Caleb had no desire for publicity and even less interest in Celeste's social world. Celeste appeared to appreciate boring. "Duration," Marisol said, 24 months, unless both parties agree to amend the arrangement. Mr. Mercer waives any claim to premarital assets, company shares, trust income, or inherited property. Ms. Vale agrees to pay $600,000 upon execution and another $1.4 million at the conclusion of the term." Caleb looked up. "That's $2 million. "You can count," Celeste said. "Useful quality. I was expecting maybe 200,000. Then consider this a lesson in not negotiating against yourself." Caleb almost smiled. Marisol continued. "Vale Dynamics would also cover temporary housing and provide Ethan with comprehensive medical and dental insurance independent of Caleb's employment. Caleb would attend major public events, live primarily at Celeste's residence on Bainbridge Island, and maintain confidentiality regarding private family matters." "My son isn't a prop," Caleb said. Celeste's fingers stopped moving over her tablet. "Explain." "If cameras happen to see us together, fine. But nobody schedules him for press appearances, interviews him, or uses him to make the marriage look wholesome." "Agreed." "And he keeps his school. The commute from Bainbridge would be difficult." "Then I'll manage it." Celeste watched him for a moment. You are negotiating transportation in a $2 million marriage contract. I told you, I'm a father before I'm anything else. At 3:05 a.m. Caleb walked downstairs to the employee family room. Vale Dynamics kept it for workers caught between shifts and childcare emergencies, though few executives probably knew it existed. Ethan was asleep sideways on a vinyl couch beneath a mariner's blanket, one sneaker still on his foot, a graphic novel resting on his chest. Caleb sat beside him and stared at the contract summary on his phone. $2 million. He could buy a modest townhouse, start a college fund, replace the Honda, stop choosing between dental bills and car repairs. Yet the thought of moving his son into a billionaire's house under a marriage built from paperwork made his stomach twist. Ethan stirred. Dad? Hey, buddy. Ethan rubbed his eyes. Did you fix the heat? Yeah. Did they pay overtime? Caleb laughed quietly. They might pay a little more than overtime. By 6:30, they were sitting in a 24-hour diner near Pioneer Square. Caleb explained the situation carefully, leaving out the trust mechanics Ethan did not need. Ms. Vale needs to get married for a business reason, he said. She offered me a lot of money to help her. We'd live at her house for a while. Ethan dragged a fry through ketchup. Do you like her? I barely know her. Does she like you? I think she likes that I passed a background check. Ethan considered that. Would we still be us? The question hit Caleb harder than any legal warning had. Always. And I keep my room? We'd have a different room. My Lego city? Coming with us. Mom's picture? Caleb's throat tightened. Ethan's mother was alive, but the photograph from happier years still mattered to him. Anything you want comes with us. Ethan nodded slowly. Then, okay. Caleb stared at him. That's it? If she's mean, we leave. Children could make impossible contracts sound obvious. Caleb reached across the table and squeezed his son's hand. Deal. The marriage license was signed at King County Administration at 9:12 that morning, under fluorescent lights and the stunned attention of 3 courthouse employees who recognized Celeste immediately. She wore an ivory pantsuit, simple earrings, and the expression of someone completing an acquisition. Caleb wore the only dark suit he owned, a charcoal number bought for a cousin's wedding 5 years earlier. Ethan sat beside them in khakis and a blue sweater, holding a plastic model of a lunar rover because he had recently decided space exploration was more interesting than superheroes. Paparazzi had already gathered outside. Someone from Celeste's office had leaked the possibility of a wedding, or Everett's people had. Either way, discretion was gone. This changes the strategy, Marisol whispered. You need to look believable. Celeste glanced at Caleb. I assume you understand what that means. I fix boilers. Interpretive romance wasn't in the apprenticeship. Ethan snorted. The clerk tried not to smile. They stood before a retired judge who performed civil ceremonies twice a week. The vows were short, legal, and strangely solemn. When Caleb placed the ring on Celeste's finger, her hand was cold. When she slid his band into place, her fingers trembled once and then stopped. The judge smiled. You may kiss. Celeste froze so subtly, nobody else would have noticed. Caleb did. He leaned closer without touching her. We can skip it, he murmured. A camera flashed through the glass door behind them. Celeste's jaw tightened. No, they'll use that. Then look at me. She did. Caleb placed one hand lightly at her waist and kissed her with deliberate restraint, just long enough to satisfy the cameras and short enough to preserve the boundary between agreement and intimacy. When he pulled back, Celeste's eyes remained on his for half a second too long. Outside, reporters shouted questions about money, the trust, Adrian Pike, and Caleb's job title. Ethan instinctively grabbed his father's hand. Caleb shifted between the boy and the cameras. Celeste noticed. Without discussion, she moved to Ethan's other side. For the photograph splashed across Seattle news sites by noon, they looked almost like a family. Celeste's Bainbridge Island house sat above the water behind cedar trees and a private gate, but it did not resemble the mansion Caleb had imagined. It was larger than any home he had ever entered, yet the architecture was warm. Wood beams, stone fireplaces, broad windows facing Puget Sound. The problem was not the house. It was the absence of life inside it. The kitchen looked unused. The bookshelves contained art books arranged by color. The guest rooms smelled faintly of cedar and nothing else. Caleb and Ethan arrived with 4 plastic bins, 2 duffel bags, Ethan's bicycle, and enough Lego bricks to constitute a structural hazard. Celeste watched from the foyer as Ethan carried in a cardboard box labeled "Important Space Stuff." "Your rooms are upstairs on the south side," she said. "There's a shared sitting room between them." Caleb set down a bin. "Our rooms? You have one. Ethan has one. And you?" "North wing." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "The trustees are supposed to believe we married because we're in love. The trustees are not checking mattress indentation. You're underestimating old rich people." For the first time, something close to amusement touched Celeste's face. "My staff has been instructed to maintain privacy. There are cameras outside the property, however." Ethan had wandered toward the windows. "Is that Seattle?" "Yes," Celeste said. "Across the water." "Do whales come here?" "Sometimes." "Have you seen one?" "No." Ethan looked genuinely concerned for her. "You should look out the windows more." Caleb turned away so she would not see him smile. Celeste glanced at her watch. "I have a board call." She started toward the stairs. "Celeste." She stopped. "Thank you," Caleb said. "For the housing, the insurance, all of it." Her expression returned to careful neutrality. "We have a contract. Still counts." For several seconds she seemed unsure how to respond. Then she nodded and disappeared upstairs. The first problem came from the press. Within 48 hours, tabloids had dug through Caleb's employment history and run photographs of him repairing a rooftop air handler under headlines like "Billionaire Bride Weds the Maintenance Man." One television panelist described him as a suspiciously convenient working-class husband. Another suggested Celeste had staged the entire marriage to satisfy the trust. Ethan found out at school when a classmate showed him a video. Caleb received a call from the principal during a compressor inspection. By the time he arrived, Ethan was sitting in the office furious rather than hurt. "He said you married her for money." Caleb crouched in front of him. "I did." Ethan blinked. "Dad." "Partly." Caleb lowered his voice. "I also made a promise. Grown-up situations can have more than one truth." "So the kid was right?" "He was trying to embarrass you. That part wasn't right." Ethan looked at the carpet. "Are we poor? We were tight on money. Are we rich now?" Caleb smiled. "We are definitely not billionaire rich." "Good. Those people seem weird." Caleb laughed despite himself. That evening, Celeste unexpectedly came home before 7. She found Ethan at the kitchen island working on a solar system project while Caleb made spaghetti. "I heard about school," she said. Ethan shrugged. "People online are dumb." Celeste sat across from him. "Yes." Caleb stared. Celeste continued. "But they can still hurt you. If anyone bothers you because of me, I want to know." Ethan studied her. "What would you do?" "Depends. Would you buy the school? No. Fire the kid? Also no." Ethan nodded. "Good." Celeste looked at Caleb. "Was there a correct answer?" "Apparently you passed." It was the first dinner they ate together, though none of them called it that. The second problem arrived in the form of Everett Sloane. He requested a trustee review, citing concerns that Celeste's marriage had been arranged solely to trigger the trust. Legally, a marriage contract did not automatically invalidate the transfer. But if Everett could prove fraud, if he could show Celeste and Caleb had entered a purely sham arrangement while misrepresenting it to the trustees, he might delay the share transfer long enough to force a leadership vote. Marisol recommended photographs, joint appearances, and a carefully managed narrative. Caleb hated every word of it. "So we perform being married until rich people decide we look married enough?" he asked. "Essentially," Celeste said. They stood in her home office overlooking the Sound. "Everett has requested a private dinner here next Saturday with 2 independent trustees." Caleb leaned against the bookcase. "He wants to inspect the house. He wants to inspect us." "Different problem." Celeste's mouth tightened. "He will ask questions designed to expose inconsistencies. Favorite food, first date, toothbrush color, probably worse." Caleb looked around. "Does he know we met beside a broken pressure regulator?" "Unfortunately." "Then why pretend we had some romantic beginning?" Celeste stared at him. "What are you suggesting?" "Tell the truth where we can. The truth is dangerous. Lies are harder to remember." Celeste folded her arms. "You enjoy arguing with me." "No, I enjoy keeping the story simple. You needed help. I needed help. We liked each other enough not to run immediately. That's more believable than saying we fell in love over room service champagne. We did not like each other. I liked that you didn't have me removed by security. That was strategic. See? Romance." Celeste almost smiled. Then her gaze moved to the paperwork on her desk. "Everett will humiliate you if he thinks it destabilizes me." Caleb's voice softened. "I've been broke in Seattle with a kid depending on me. A 70-year-old man in a cashmere blazer is not the scariest thing I've faced." Celeste looked at him then, really looked. "No," she said quietly. "I'm beginning to understand that." Over the next 2 weeks, Caleb's presence altered Celeste's house in ways no contract had anticipated. He fixed a loose stair tread that had squeaked for years. He replaced a dishwasher gasket that leaked just enough to stain the cabinet. He discovered the fireplace damper in the family room had been installed backward and corrected it, while Ethan handed him tools. None of the repairs were necessary in the billionaire sense. Celeste could have summoned contractors with one text, but Caleb noticed problems before she noticed inconvenience. More importantly, Ethan made the house impossible to keep sterile. His backpack appeared near the mudroom. His shoes migrated beneath benches. His drawings colonized one side of the refrigerator after Celeste's house manager tentatively attached the first one with a magnet. Celeste pretended not to care, then asked Ethan why Saturn's rings were purple in his picture. "Because normal Saturn is boring," he said. "Fair." Caleb began seeing her late at night after Ethan went to bed. Celeste would enter the kitchen in stocking feet, carrying a laptop, intending only to get coffee. Caleb would tell her coffee at midnight was a terrible idea. She would ignore him. One night, after watching her open the refrigerator and stare blankly at its contents, Caleb asked, "When did you last eat?" "Lunch." "What kind?" "A meeting." "That's not food." He made scrambled eggs and toast. Celeste sat at the island answering emails until he slid the plate over her keyboard. "You're very controlling for someone contractually subordinate to me. I'm union trained. You're not in a union. Spiritually, I am." She ate. Slowly at first, then with the focus of someone who had not realized she was starving. Caleb said nothing. He understood people who forgot themselves while caring for responsibilities. He had been one for years. Seeing that same exhaustion inside a woman worth billions made money seem briefly irrelevant. Celeste discovered Caleb's version of exhaustion. 1. Tuesday at 2:13 a.m. She came downstairs after a call with Singapore and found him asleep at the kitchen table with insurance forms spread around his arms. Ethan's new coverage had approved an orthodontic procedure Caleb had been postponing, but the old insurer was disputing a previous claim. Celeste picked up one page, then put it down before she crossed a line. Caleb woke immediately. "What time is it?" "Too late." He rubbed his face. "You're one to talk. What are you doing?" "Paperwork. My office can handle it." "Your office is already paying for half my life." Celeste leaned against the island. "That is the arrangement." "I know. Then why resist using the resources you negotiated?" Caleb looked toward the dark hallway. "Because money can solve problems without teaching you how to live with what it changed." Celeste was silent. Caleb continued. 3 weeks ago, I worried about whether I could afford moving boxes. Now there's a driver offering to take Ethan to school and a woman from your staff asking what brand of socks he prefers. It's helpful. It's also weird. You think I'm trying to buy your son? No. He shook his head. I think you solve discomfort by funding it until it stops making noise. That landed. Celeste's expression went still. That is an offensive characterization. Probably. Caleb gathered the papers. Still true. She should have walked away. Instead, she sat across from him. My mother died when I was 16, she said. Caleb stopped. My father responded by hiring more staff. Tutors, drivers, a cook, a grief counselor who came to the house twice a week. Everything except actually talking to me. Her eyes remained on the table. So yes, perhaps I learned that money is how responsible people fix pain. Caleb's irritation disappeared. Money fixes a lot. But not everything. No. The house was quiet around them. Then Celeste asked almost reluctantly, what fixes the rest? Caleb thought of Ethan climbing into his bed after nightmares, of shared meals, of staying when leaving would be easier. Usually people, he said. Celeste looked more frightened by that answer than by any board threat. Saturday's trustee dinner began at 6:30 p.m. with Everett Sloan arriving 11 minutes early. Caleb immediately disliked the tactic. Men like Everett used punctuality as a weapon, arriving before they were expected, so other people could feel unprepared. He entered the Bainbridge house wearing a camel overcoat and carrying a bottle of wine old enough to have its own voting rights. With him came Judith Weller, a retired judge who served as independent trustee, and Malcolm Price, a former bank executive who had known Celeste's father. Celeste wore a dark green dress and the calm expression she used during product recalls. Caleb wore a navy suit Celeste's assistant had ordered, though he insisted on his own watch because Ethan had bought it at a school holiday shop for $12. Everett noticed everything. Mr. Mercer, he said, taking Caleb's hand. Still employed in facilities? Still keeping your headquarters warm. How industrious. Caleb smiled politely. Dinner started with salmon, roasted vegetables, and questions disguised as conversation. Where had they first spoken? What did Celeste order for breakfast? What side of the bed did Caleb sleep on? Caleb answered only what was true. She doesn't eat breakfast unless someone puts food directly in front of her. Judith glanced at Celeste. Accurate? Celeste's mouth twitched. Unfortunately. Malcolm asked what Caleb admired about his wife. Everett leaned back, clearly expecting the trap to work. Caleb thought for a moment. She reads every safety report that includes an injury, even when someone else summarized it. Most executives read the summary. Celeste turned slightly toward him. He continued, she remembers names from the maintenance department. Not all of them, more than she thinks she does. Everett smiled thinly. That sounds more like an employee evaluation than love. Caleb looked at him. You asked what I admire. I gave you something real. The room went quiet. Judith hid a smile behind her wine glass. Everett had expected awkwardness. What he got was certainty, and Caleb could tell it irritated him. The evening might still have ended politely if Everett had not turned his attention to Ethan. The boy had been allowed to eat upstairs with a movie, but he came down around 8 carrying a broken model rover. "Dad?" Caleb turned. "Sorry, the wheel came off. I'll fix it in a minute." Ethan noticed the guests and stopped. Everett studied him with an expression that made Caleb's shoulders tighten. "This must be the famous son." Celeste's voice sharpened. "Ethan was not part of this review." "Of course not." Everett smiled at the boy. "Do you like living here?" Ethan glanced at Caleb before answering. "Mostly." "Mostly? The ferry makes school mornings annoying." Malcolm coughed into his napkin. Everett continued. "And what do you call Ms. Vale?" Caleb set down his fork. "Everett, it's an innocent question." Ethan answered anyway. "Celeste. Not Mom?" "My mom is my mom." The boy's face closed. Caleb's pulse jumped. Everett nodded as though confirming something important. "Naturally. And do your father and Celeste share a room?" "That's enough," Caleb said. The warmth vanished from his voice. Everett spread his hands. "We are legally obligated to determine whether this household reflects a genuine marital relationship. You're legally obligated to examine documents. You're not entitled to interrogate a 9-year-old about adult sleeping arrangements." "Caleb," Celeste murmured, warning and gratitude tangled together. Everett looked pleased. "Sensitive subject?" Caleb pushed back his chair and stood. "No. Simple boundary." Ethan watched him. That mattered more than the trustees. "My son is not evidence. He's not a prop for your trust, your board fight, or this marriage contract. If your case depends on making a child uncomfortable at dinner, your case is weak." Everett's face cooled. "Sit down, Mr. Mercer." Caleb did not move. Then Judith Weller placed her napkin beside her plate. "Actually, Everett, I think Mr. Mercer is correct. The child is outside the scope of inquiry." Everett's jaw tightened. Ethan quietly handed Caleb the broken rover. Caleb squeezed his shoulder. "Upstairs, buddy." As Ethan left, Celeste looked at Caleb with something deeper than relief. Everett changed tactics. If he could not use Ethan, he would use class. "Tell me, Caleb," he said after dessert arrived, "what exactly makes you compatible with Celeste? Your worlds could hardly be more different." "Probably true. She negotiates acquisitions in Zurich. You repair ventilation equipment. Among other things." Everett looked toward Judith and Malcolm. "Forgive me, but marriage generally requires shared intellectual and social interests." Caleb set down his coffee. "Does it?" "Usually." "Then maybe that explains the divorce rate in your neighborhood." Malcolm looked down, fighting a smile. Everett's face reddened. Celeste whispered, "Caleb." He ignored the warning this time. "You want to know what we have in common? We both spend our lives fixing things other people don't notice until they fail." Everett scoffed. "That is a rather convenient metaphor." "It isn't a metaphor." Caleb leaned forward. 2 months ago, the vacuum pumps in your surgical training lab started vibrating. Your finance department delayed replacement because the quarter was closing. Celeste approved the cost anyway, after one of my techs explained what failure could do during a live demonstration. She didn't understand every mechanical detail. She understood consequences. Everett's expression changed. Caleb continued. "Last year, when the board wanted to close the Spokane assembly operation, she refused because 300 families depended on that plant and the numbers could be fixed with a new supplier contract. You called that sentimental. 6 months later, Spokane became the company's highest margin facility." Celeste stared at him. "You read the board summaries? Facilities gets copied when plant closures affect buildings." Caleb looked back at Everett. "You think I don't belong in her world because I carry tools. Fine, but I understand what she actually does. She carries consequences. Every decision, every layoff she avoids, every recall she orders, every investor she disappoints to keep a product safe. You people call her cold because she doesn't smile while carrying your weight. I call that tired." No one spoke. Everett's lips thinned. "You are remarkably defensive for a man who has known her less than a month." Caleb felt Celeste go still beside him. That was the moment he could have stepped back into the safe version of the contract. Smile. Deflect. Protect the payout. Instead, he looked at the man who had spent years treating Celeste's life as governance material, and decided Safe had already left the building. "Maybe I notice quickly," Caleb said. "I notice when she comes home at midnight and checks injury reports before she eats. I notice that she keeps a photograph of her mother in the drawer instead of on the desk because she doesn't want people asking about it. I notice that she hates cinnamon, but her staff keeps ordering pastries with cinnamon because nobody ever asks. I notice she stands with her back to walls when reporters are around because her ex sold private messages and taught her not to trust what happens behind her." Celeste's breath caught. Caleb had never said any of those things aloud. "And I notice something else." Every man in this room who claims to be protecting Richard Vale's legacy is perfectly comfortable using his daughter's private life as a lever to control the company she saved. If her father wanted stability, he should have written competent governance rules instead of a marriage deadline. Judith's eyebrows rose. Malcolm stared at Everett. Caleb's voice stayed steady. "You don't have to believe I'm the husband you would have chosen for her." "I'm not, but I am her husband. And while I'm sitting at her table, you will not talk about her like she's a defective asset you're deciding whether to return." Silence spread across the dining room. Everett looked at Celeste, expecting her to rein Caleb in. She lifted her wine glass with a hand that trembled slightly. "You heard him." The trustees left 20 minutes later. Judith quietly told Celeste the review would be completed without further household interviews. Malcolm shook Caleb's hand at the door. Everett did neither. He pulled on his coat, looked at Celeste, and said, "Your father would be appalled by this spectacle." Celeste's face turned white. Caleb started to respond, but she touched his arm. "No," she said. Then she looked directly at Everett. "My father is dead. I have spent 12 years letting men use their memory of him as if it outranked my life. That ends tonight." Everett's expression tightened. "Without the voting shares, you won't last 6 months. Then you should pray the trustees rule against me." She opened the door herself. Everett stepped into the rain. When the latch clicked shut, the house became intensely quiet. Celeste stood motionless in the foyer. Caleb loosened his tie. "I'm pretty sure I violated at least 6 sections of the agreement." She said nothing. Maybe 7. Still nothing. "Celeste?" She turned. There were tears in her eyes, and the sight startled him more than anger would have. "You noticed the cinnamon." Caleb blinked. "What?" "Everything you said in there, and that's the part I can't stop thinking about." She laughed once, shaky and embarrassed. "My assistant has ordered cinnamon pastries for 4 years. I hate them." Caleb stepped closer. "You could tell her." "I know." "Why don't you?" Celeste looked away. "Because correcting one more person feels exhausting." Caleb understood that more than he wanted to. She had built a life where competence became a prison. The better she carried everything, the more everyone handed her. "You didn't have to defend me," she whispered. "Yes, I did." "No, the contract only requires public support." "That wasn't public." "Exactly." She looked at him again. "So why?" Caleb thought of Ethan upstairs, of the house beginning to feel lived in, of Celeste eating scrambled eggs at midnight. "Because he was being cruel," he said, "and because I didn't like it." The trustee decision arrived Monday morning. Judith Weller called Celeste personally. The marriage was legally valid. No evidence supported a fraud challenge. The final voting shares transferred at 11:00 a.m. Giving Celeste control, the board could not easily dislodge. Vale Dynamics stock rose 4% when the ownership uncertainty ended. Marisol opened champagne in the executive suite. Caleb was in the basement replacing a failed circulation pump when Celeste found him. She stood in a cream suit among pipes, control panels, and two confused technicians who immediately pretended to become deeply interested in a pressure gauge. "You could have called," Caleb said. "I did. You didn't answer." He pulled out his phone. 3 missed calls. "Pump room." Celeste held out her hand. "The shares transferred." Caleb grinned. "You won." "We won." Pretty sure I mostly yelled at an old man over fish. Apparently that was persuasive. One technician quietly walked out. The other followed. Caleb wiped his hands on a rag. "So what happens now?" That question changed something in Celeste's face. Until that moment, every step of their relationship had pointed toward the same goal: secure the shares, survive the review, protect the company. The goal was complete. Suddenly, the 2-year contract felt less like a bridge and more like a countdown. "Now," Celeste said carefully, "you no longer need to work in this building unless you want to. The first payment has cleared. The housing agreement remains. Everything continues." "I know. You could also take leave. I'd go crazy. You repair mechanical systems for fun. I contain multitudes." She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. Caleb realized she was afraid he might leave now that his most dangerous obligation was over. He could have reassured her. Instead, his radio crackled with a call about a leaking condensate line. "I have to get that." Celeste nodded. "Of course." She turned away. Caleb watched her walk toward the elevator, feeling for the first time that the hardest part of their arrangement had not been getting married. It might be deciding what they were when they no longer needed to pretend. Over the following month, life settled into something more dangerous than performance. It became ordinary. Caleb drove Ethan to school 3 mornings a week and took the ferry back to Seattle. Celeste began working from home on Fridays, first claiming efficiency and later abandoning the excuse entirely. She learned Ethan liked his grilled cheese nearly burned and hated apple slices if the peel remained. Ethan learned Celeste could solve algebra in her head but had no idea how to throw a football. He taught her badly. She retaliated by teaching him chess. Caleb watched them develop their own relationship, awkward and unforced. Celeste never asked Ethan to call her anything special. She showed up. That was enough. One Friday evening, Caleb came home to find them on the living room floor surrounded by pieces of a model Mars rover. "Traitor," he told Ethan. "You started without me. Celeste understands wiring diagrams. I understand them too. She has better handwriting." Celeste looked smug. Caleb dropped his bag. "I'm being replaced in my own fake marriage." The words slipped out playfully, but the room changed. Ethan looked between them. Celeste's smile faded. "It's not fake," Ethan said. Caleb's heart stuttered. "Buddy, you're really married. Legally, yes. And we really live here. Yes. And she really comes to my games." Caleb glanced at Celeste. Ethan shrugged. "So maybe the beginning was fake. The rest looks real." Then he returned to the rover, satisfied with his logic. Children could walk through emotional minefields while adults searched for maps. That night, after Ethan went upstairs, Caleb found Celeste standing on the terrace looking across the dark water. "He shouldn't have to figure out our confusion," she said. "He isn't confused." "I am." Caleb stepped beside her. "Me too." "That's not comforting." "Wasn't meant to be." She laughed softly. Neither of them moved away. Celeste broke the silence. "When the contract ends, what were you planning to do?" Caleb considered buy a townhouse, stay near Ethan's school, maybe start a small mechanical consulting company. You've thought about it. I'm a single father. I plan exits before entrances. The words landed harder than intended. Celeste folded her arms against the cold. "And us?" "The contract says quiet divorce." "I know what the contract says." "Then what are you asking?" She turned toward him. "I'm asking whether you want that." Caleb's chest tightened. A ferry moved across the sound below, its lights small and steady. Celeste, there are about 1,000 reasons not to answer that. Name 3. You're my CEO. Transfer departments. You're a billionaire. Tragic. We met because you purchased 2 years of my life. She flinched. Caleb regretted the wording instantly. That's not what I meant. It is what happened. At first, she repeated. Caleb saw fear moving behind her control. You know what scares me? She asked. That I can't tell which parts you would choose without the contract. Dinner. This house. Me. Caleb looked at her. I can. Celeste stopped breathing. I'd choose dinner. I'd choose the house when Ethan's here because he loves it. And you? He stepped closer. You're the complicated part. Wonderful. Because choosing you means believing you might choose me when you don't need anything. Her expression softened. Caleb, I don't want gratitude. I don't want to become the guy you keep because he helped you win a trust fight. And I don't want to become the woman you stay with because leaving feels disloyal. They stood facing each other in the cold, finally admitting the same fear from opposite directions. The contract had protected them from obligation. Feelings removed that protection. So what do we do? Celeste whispered. Caleb exhaled. Something neither of us is good at. Which is? Go slowly. Going slowly lasted 12 days. On the 13th, Ethan developed appendicitis. Caleb woke at 2:40 a.m. to the sound of his son vomiting in the upstairs bathroom. 20 minutes later, Ethan was curled on the floor with sharp pain low on his right side. Caleb's world narrowed instantly. Money, contracts, boards, billionaire marriages. None of it mattered. He lifted Ethan into his arms and shouted for Celeste without thinking. She appeared in the hallway barefoot, hair loose, wearing an old University of Washington sweatshirt Caleb had never seen. What happened? I think appendix. We're going to Seattle Children's. I'll drive. I can drive. You're shaking. He was. Celeste took the keys. They made the ferry only because she called ahead and arranged emergency boarding through a contact at the terminal. Ethan lay across the back seat with his head in Caleb's lap, whispering that he was sorry for ruining the night. You didn't ruin anything, Caleb told him. You are literally not allowed to apologize for internal organs. Celeste drove with both hands locked on the wheel. At the hospital, she did not use her name to skip anyone. She filled water cups, carried Caleb's jacket, and sat beside him through imaging. When the surgeon confirmed appendicitis and recommended immediate surgery, Caleb signed forms with hands that would not stay steady. Ethan looked terrified as the nurse prepared to take him upstairs. Dad, come with me. I can walk to the doors. Celeste stepped back, giving them space. Ethan reached for her too. You come. Celeste froze. Then she took his hand. The three of them walked together until staff separated them at the surgical entrance. When the doors closed, Caleb leaned against the wall and finally broke. Celeste wrapped both arms around him before he could stop her. He's going to be okay, she whispered. You don't know that. No, I don't. She held tighter. But you don't have to be afraid alone. Ethan's surgery was uncomplicated. He woke groggy, irritated, and deeply offended that the hospital would not let him eat pizza. Caleb sat beside the bed until his back cramped. Celeste stayed too. Around noon, Marisol called regarding a board meeting. Celeste silenced the phone. You should go, Caleb said. No. The company needs you. The company has 12,000 employees. My being unavailable for 6 hours will not trigger collapse. There's a first time for everything. Celeste glared at him. Ethan, half asleep, murmured, Stop flirting. Caleb nearly fell out of the chair. Celeste turned scarlet. He's medicated, Caleb said. I heard you, Ethan mumbled. Still counts. Celeste laughed so suddenly a nurse looked in from the hall. Later, when Ethan slept, she went downstairs for coffee. Caleb's phone buzzed with a message from his ex-wife. She had seen a social media post from another parent and wanted to know whether Ethan was okay. Caleb stared at the screen. Celeste returned and recognized the expression. His mother? Yeah. Will she come? Probably not. He hated the bitterness in his own voice. Celeste sat beside him. You never talk about her. Not much to say. She wanted a different life. I spent a long time being angry because Ethan wasn't enough to make her stay. That isn't a fair thing to put on him. Caleb turned. Celeste continued carefully. Adults leave for reasons children cannot repair. Maybe reasons spouses cannot repair either. He knew she was right. You ever worry you'll leave? He asked. Celeste did not pretend to misunderstand. Every day. Why? Because wanting this makes me capable of losing it. Caleb looked through the glass at Ethan sleeping. That's parenthood. I'm not his parent. No. Caleb reached for her hand. But you're becoming someone he counts on. Celeste's eyes filled. This time she did not look away. The contract ended 7 weeks later, not legally, but emotionally. Celeste came home on a rainy Thursday carrying a slim folder. Caleb was repairing Ethan's bicycle in the mudroom. We need to talk. Those are expensive words. She sat on the bench across from him and placed the folder between them. Caleb wiped grease from his fingers. What is it? An amendment. His stomach tightened. To what? Our agreement. He opened it. The first page terminated the $2 million completion payment requirement. The second converted the already paid amount into unconditional compensation that Caleb would keep regardless of whether the marriage continued. The third removed all public appearance obligations. The fourth canceled the mandatory 2-year term entirely. Caleb looked up. You're releasing me. Yes. Why? Celeste clasped her hands. Because I need to know. Know what? Whether you'll stay when staying costs you nothing and leaving costs you nothing. Caleb stared at her. The house was quiet except for rain against the windows. You think this solves it? No. What about the trust? The shares are mine. The trustees closed the review. The board? Can survive gossip. Her voice shook slightly. I built a contract because contracts are safer than asking someone to choose me. I don't want safe anymore. Caleb closed the folder. What do you want? Celeste's composure finally gave way. You, Ethan. Breakfast that's too loud, shoes in the hallway, arguments about coffee, your terrible hardware store t-shirts in my laundry. I want to come home and know somebody will tell me when I'm being impossible instead of billing me for the privilege. Caleb's throat tightened. That's a disturbing list. I'm serious. I know. He sat beside her. What happens if we're bad at this? We probably will be. If we fight, we fight. If Ethan gets attached? Celeste's eyes softened. He already is. Caleb looked at the unsigned amendment. And if I stay? Then for the first time, neither of us gets paid to pretend. Caleb signed the amendment. Then he handed the pen to Celeste. She signed beneath him. For a moment, they simply stared at the paper that dismantled the safest part of their marriage. Celeste laughed nervously. That was anticlimactic. Most life-changing paperwork is. I expected to feel different. Give it a second. She looked at him. Are you staying? Caleb let the question breathe. He thought about the apartment they had left behind, the late-night diner, the courthouse kiss, Everett's interrogation, scrambled eggs at midnight, Ethan reaching for Celeste's hand outside the operating room. He thought about how easy it would be to mistake gratitude for love, and how carefully they had tried not to. Then he thought about his son's observation. Maybe the beginning was fake, but the rest looked real. I'm staying tonight, he said. Celeste's face fell slightly. Caleb continued, and tomorrow if you still want me here. After that, we keep choosing. She studied him. That is an infuriating answer. It's the only honest one. I was hoping for a sweeping declaration. You married a maintenance guy. Building systems technician. He grinned. You remembered. I read what I sign. That line, borrowed from their first night, broke the tension. Celeste laughed. Caleb reached for her face, giving her time to pull away. She did not. Their first courthouse kiss had been measured for cameras. This one was slow and uncertain, interrupted by both of them smiling, then deeper when uncertainty gave way to relief. No attorneys stood nearby. No trust deadline ticked toward midnight. No cameras waited outside. Caleb felt Celeste's hands settle at his waist as if testing whether he was really there. When they separated, she rested her forehead against his. So, he murmured, about the separate bedrooms. Terminated. The public appearances? Optional. Cinnamon pastries? Absolutely terminated. From the hallway, Ethan shouted, "I can hear you!" Caleb closed his eyes. Celeste started laughing again. For once, being overheard did not threaten anything. 1 year later, Vail Dynamics held its annual Employee Family Day on a Saturday in June. Caleb had accepted a new role overseeing infrastructure resilience across the company's U.S. facilities, though he insisted on reporting through operations rather than directly to Celeste. Healthy governance, he told her whenever she complained. Ethan, now 10, spent the morning demonstrating a small rover he had built with his school robotics club. Celeste stood beside him wearing jeans and company sneakers, listening seriously while he explained why his suspension design was superior to last year's. Everett Sloan had retired from the board after losing support among the independent directors. He still gave interviews suggesting the company had abandoned traditional stewardship, which Celeste considered a compliment. The voting trust had been rewritten by court-approved amendment to remove the marriage condition for future heirs. Celeste had insisted. One dead man's anxiety caused enough trouble, she said. Caleb still wore the simple wedding band from the courthouse. Celeste still wore hers. They had discussed having a second ceremony someday, one with vows they actually chose. Ethan wanted to be best man and demanded veto authority over cake flavors. Nothing about their life was perfectly balanced. Celeste still worked too much. Caleb still tried to solve every problem himself. They argued about schedules, privacy, school pickup, and whether the house needed another dog after Ethan began campaigning for one. But the arguments no longer felt like threats. They were signs of investment. Late that afternoon, Caleb found Celeste alone near the rooftop garden of the headquarters tower, looking out across Seattle. Hiding? He asked. Recovering. From 10-year-olds? Your son has recruited 6 executives into a petition for a company-sponsored robotics league. Natural leader. She leaned into Caleb's shoulder. Below them, the building hummed with systems he understood intimately. Pumps, ducts, valves, circuits. Countless unseen parts carrying load. Celeste followed his gaze. Do you remember the night we met? Hard to forget. You almost flooded a server room and bought a husband. The valve was your department's responsibility, and the marriage was yours, she smiled. Fair. Caleb looked at the glass tower rising around them. Once, he had thought wealthy people lived beyond ordinary fear. Celeste had taught him otherwise. Money could create options, comfort, insulation, and power. It could not guarantee that someone stayed because they wanted to. Celeste had once believed contracts were safer than trust. Caleb had once believed stability meant avoiding every risk he could not afford. Both had been wrong in ways that only became obvious after they collided. Ethan ran onto the terrace holding a sheet of paper. Good news, he announced. 4 vice presidents signed. Celeste took the petition. You're lobbying my executives during Family Day? It's called networking. Caleb covered his mouth to hide a laugh. Ethan pointed at him. Dad supports it. Dad has not read the budget. Dad said STEM is important. Celeste raised an eyebrow at Caleb. Did he? I was speaking philosophically. Ethan groaned. Celeste signed the bottom of the page. Pilot program. 1 year. Ethan stared. Seriously? With measurable outcomes. You ruin everything with business words. He hugged her anyway. Celeste froze for only a fraction of a second before hugging him back. Caleb watched, feeling the quiet weight of everything they had built from a bargain neither had expected to survive. The strongest part of the structure was not the legal agreement, the trust, the money, or even the house across the water. It was the choice underneath all of them, the choice to keep showing up after the obligation disappeared. And that was something no board could vote away. Sometimes the strongest relationships are not built from perfect beginnings, but from the choices people continue to make after obligation disappears. Caleb and Celeste began with a contract, money, and mutual need, yet what slowly transformed their lives was something no legal agreement could guarantee, showing up for each other when there was nothing left to gain. Caleb protected his son above every promise, while Celeste learned that money could solve problems but could never replace presence, trust, or genuine care. Their story reminds us that love is not proven by grand declarations or expensive gifts. It is revealed in small moments, remembering what someone dislikes, staying beside them in a hospital, defending them when they feel alone, sharing ordinary meals, and choosing them again when walking away would be easier. True security does not come from controlling every risk. Sometimes it comes from having the courage to be vulnerable and allowing another person to matter. Life may bring people into our world for unexpected reasons, but what matters most is what we choose to build afterward. So ask yourself, who in your life keeps showing up even when they don't have to? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd truly love to hear your story. And if this message touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about love, courage, family, and the choice